Happy Sunday, folks. Another Sunday, so time for another weekly update. Last week was a busy one, so all three of us commissioners were at an Association of Counties conference that was held in Eugene. I got there Monday night, and I got back about 10 Thursday night, and then had some meetings on Friday that were good ones. So, long week, a lot of information. One of the benefits of conferences like this for us is, one, just meeting with other commissioners, finding out what's going on in their counties, what challenges they're having, what solutions they're finding. And some of what came out of that was connections that I was able to make with people I need to talk to about the projects I've got going on. The other part that's good is when you're in the community where you're working. So I'm a commissioner for Coos County. When I was on the city council for Coos Bay, if I was in Coos Bay, I was looking at everything in the city when I drove around, and you're looking at minutia, and it doesn't let you look at the larger scale of things sometimes. So getting out of the area, but in an environment that's still immersed in county business is good, because it lets you look at some higher level aspects of what you're doing and some broader ideas. I'm not distracted by the potholes or the quality or lack thereof of the road I'm driving on. I've got time to focus on how am I going to interact with state offices in a way that's going to be effective for Coos County. What are the challenges we're seeing coming out of the state and then out of the federal government, of which we've got many right now in both fields? And how are we going to handle those, deal with those? What is the long-term economic goal of the region? Obviously, we want to be able to pay our bills. We want financial stability. But that is a minimum. We're not shooting for making it to next week. We want to make it into the next century with sustainable revenues. So broader thoughts like that are ones that we're able to have sometimes when we're out and about. And I'm sure the others will speak to what they got out of it during their comments during our meetings. We do commissioner comments in our main meetings. But some of what I was able to get out of it. I was a presenter on how we can coordinate county as commissioners support and continue public health functions. So we see a lot of challenges coming to public health in terms of funding. Really everything we do, there's a concern around funding right now. And the question of how do we kind of endure through this period of time we're in where funding is getting cut substantially, how do we continue to deliver good services to our communities? So I was invited to be on a panel. I was on that panel, asked for my advice. A lot of what the others talked about, not our other commissioners, but other commissioners and public health directors from around the state that were on the same panel, talked about was different House bills coming out, the funding impacts with changes to Medicaid, Medicare, food benefits changing, what that means for the community. I took a different approach to it. We talk a lot in the groups I'm in around the political implications, the political outcomes or different decisions that are made in legislation. But as county leaders, I enforced we are the elected leaders within our counties. The most important thing we can do is lead. I don't like to go by the title commissioner. I am Drew. But I also have to recognize that that title carries weight. So when I'm interacting with different groups, I can bring people to the table that maybe it'd be harder to do as an individual citizen or even as a city councilor I wouldn't have been able to do in the same manner. As an example, outside of health, I had not talked with the FBI field director for our region until I became a commissioner. And I was interested in drug issues in our community, crime, gangs, and I was able to just speak to the guy at the FBI about their operations in our area. I think his name was Dean. In that same vein, we're able to convene nonprofits, health services. I can talk with our CCO very easily. I was able to do that in the past because of my work. But Advanced Health I can talk to and have frank conversations around the financial condition of not just Coos Health and Wellness in the county, but also other medical institutions in our area, so that I know the bigger ecosystem of public health and broader health needs in our community. And how do we factor in? What can we do to help that? Like when the hospital had to get rid of some of its parent programs for their budgetary issues, Coos Health and Wellness was able to pick those up. So we have continuity of care for parents and youth. How do we coordinate those things? And then also, as we look at a shifting funding landscape for nonprofits, I have a background in that. It's easy enough for me to convene people. It is even easier with my new title. How do we, and I'm fortunate that one of the leaders in the nonprofit community around here that is able to convene people very easily has been a friend and given me education and knowledge over many years now. But we can bring people into one room and have frank conversations around what is my nonprofit doing, what is your nonprofit doing, what are we doing as government, and where should we be isolating these functions, not isolating in the terms of creating silos. We want cross-communication between agencies, but for each agency to focus on what it's good at and let other agencies do the part that they're good at instead of trying to get a little bit of everything. Let us have focus and function. And that's what I encourage the other commissioners to do and other county governance throughout the state. Learn some general information. So when we look at electric infrastructure, has been a concern of mine. Now that I'm in Coquille a lot more, down towards Myrtle Point, out towards Powers, I've noticed they do not have the stability of their electrical services that we do in Coos Bay and North Bend. In particular, where I'm at in Coos Bay, I seem to have a lot more stable power than we see in some of the cities in the South County. So I've talked with our PUC, I've talked with the power provider for everyone down there, and we talked about transmission lines. One of the challenges I've now learned is these PUCs, these utility providers, are having problems specifically in the electrical side getting parts. Prices have tripled in recent years. The cause for this is the expansion of the data center network requires a lot of the same things that our transformers do, and transmission lines, power transmission. So one of the areas that we've seen utilities run into a problem is their cost of operating has been growing exponentially as we see an increase in data centers, AI technology requiring more and more infrastructure. Those businesses are able to outpurchase our public utilities. So there are discussions, how do we get around this? How do we create a standing stockpile or bulk order, or what do we do to ensure utilities can continue to get what they need in a world where there is and will continue to be increased demand for these same electrical components within data centers. One of those broad scale things you get to learn about at conferences like this, and that impacts us directly here, despite it being a global item. That is something that impacts power stability on the South Coast, because those parts are needed. We're a smaller market. It's harder to get that attention out here, so we've got to figure out a way to fight even harder to ensure our infrastructure is good down here, and we're competing with AI networks. Let's see. Some things around homelessness. That is not looking good for the foreseeable future. There's going to be around 73% reduction in funding for rental assistance programs. Now, this is part of the push to eliminate the Housing First model. So, Housing First purports that you need to get someone into housing before you do anything else. If you're trying to get them sober, they need housing first. If they're trying to get mentally stable, they need housing first. It's not inaccurate. There are areas, usually in individual cases, where I see a problem, but the simple answer is, if you don't have somewhere for a person to shelter every night, they're not going to get clean. It's going to be extremely difficult. They have to have somewhere safe to be that is separate from the environment that's keeping them in addiction. So in that sense, that is accurate. I worry about making sure it's people that actually want to get the service getting into that housing. But that's a filtration issue. That's not central to the concept. If you're trying to stabilize someone psychologically, you definitely need somewhere for them to shelter. Even if it's not a house, in my sense, if it's somewhere temporary, you still need that. And one of the other challenges with the housing first model is we don't have the housing stock. So when you see data around people rehoused, it's important to remember when you don't have an environment with enough housing, every one of those rehouses is somebody that's not housed anymore. They would still be in that house. So there are areas where it has a problem, but that's not necessarily a nationwide problem, and Housing First is a nationwide program. And it still helps once you get the housing stock. The prior method saw about, what was it? It was like a 73% fail rate of trying to get people stabilized into housing and staying that way long term without recidivism, so without becoming homeless again. Whereas the Housing First model has around a 80% success rate, is the data that was presented to us at this conference by Jimmy, is somebody that runs a community action agency up around Salem. I previously ran Orca, that's a community action agency, so I know Jimmy. He does good work. I trust him with numbers, and it's a reasonable number to me because I've seen those clients where we had a client at one point when I worked in mental health. Now this would have been 2017-ish. He was in the ER, average 3 times a day. Some days more, some days less. He had COPD, he was mentally ill, and he was on the street. So 3 times a day on average, I would say. When we got him into housing, that number dropped to, I want to say, he might have been there 3 times in a month. So you think of the cost savings of that to the medical system. And not only cost savings, we think of these things in terms of money a lot. But another thing I pointed out when I was speaking at this conference is that's not just the money. That's 3 times a day that was not a bed in the ER taken up. That's capacity in the mental health ward at our local hospital. That's less police time being taken addressing the individual. It's less firefighter time being taken responding to medical emergencies, less ambulance time. So outside of the money, there are massive implications when you can get someone stable and not taking up first responder time or space in emergency care. That is a critical component, and we're going to see that funding cut. We're expecting there are about 170,000 people throughout the nation receiving that support, that rental assistance. It sounds like January 1st, that money isn't there. So depending on the state they're in, the laws around evictions, I would imagine with Oregon, because our laws take a long time, it'd be late February or somewhere in March, we see the really big spike in homelessness throughout Oregon because of this. So yeah, they're expecting a massive spike in homelessness next year because of that cut. Another piece of trivia that came out of that same conversation, for every $100 that is seen for rising rents, there is a corresponding 9% homelessness rise on average. So from whatever the number is sitting at, add 9%. Not like 9% of people are homeless now. But yeah, $100 is almost a 10% rise. It was a surprising figure, really. But, I can see it with how many people are living paycheck to paycheck every month. We've got that. Let's see. Some of the good news that came up. There is discussion around creating a stronger housing development lobby. So there are several groups like Renters Association, Landlords Association, other groups that advocate for housing production. And the Coastal Caucus of Local Governments is a very strong force as well at the Capitol, and they speak to it too. So these things exist. But what was discussed was, how do we get all of these things coordinated on one page? How do we make sure that multiple representatives, or not multiple, a representative from these multiple groups is present when the lobbying is happening at the Capitol to get housing production up? Because just like I was talking about with Housing First, if we don't have the houses to house people in, you will not solve addiction, you will not solve homelessness. You're going to continue to have an inflow at your local hospital because those two things aren't solved. Emergency services are drained. It is a massive problem, and my opinion, we're not doing enough as a state to increase housing production. Related to that, raw resources, learned not necessarily through this conference, but broader conversations around this conference and other conversations I've been having in the community. There are mills in this state, including at least one locally, that are concerned about the level of timber availability we're going to see in the coming years. 3 to 5 years, there's at least one mill in the state that thinks it won't be able to get the timber it needs based on the land it has. So talking about that also brought us into the conversation around timber production and the federal responsibility. I didn't put my note on here, but nutshell, ONC lands, timber lands, feds own them. We get a portion of the money when they cut. They're supposed to cut 500 million board feet per year. They have only cut 270, seemed to be the number under the past president. 290 seemed to be the number under the current and former president. The federal government never actually reaches that number, which means we don't have the kind of money we could have to provide services. We get, I mean, if they're in the 270, 290 range, we're getting 3/5, less than 3/5 of the money we're supposed to get off of that, which I think in this last, sorry, I'm hitting buttons, last budget cycle, off the top of my head, because I didn't write it down, if that money had been there, if they had cut to the appropriate level based on the money we received, we would not have had the same kind of deficit we had. We had a $1.8 million deficit in this last budget. I think it probably would have been closer to $500,000 if they had cut what they were supposed to cut. Probably less. And that number has also changed because that's sustainable yield from a study around the 70s, I think it was. It might have been the 50s. Present studies show 1.2 billion board feet would still be sustainable, at which point we would be flush. There'd be no budget crisis. But it's not being done. So, pros and cons. Pro, the money is there and the federal government's obligated to do its job. Con, they don't, and they haven't in God knows how many decades. Problem shooting off of that, we learned more about timber harvests, where that's sitting, and now that Secure Rural Schools was cut, and it still is cut, last I knew, we have a receipts revenue situation. This federal government, in the last budget bill and about 2 other attempts before that under different methods, cuts us out of that money. That money was well over $1 million in our last budget. It won't hit this budget cycle, but it will be coming in the future if the situation stands that the federal government has cut us out of the money we are entitled to. Which has also turned into a bigger problem because then they realized they did it, and now there's a legal battle over it because everything's a legal battle these days. Additional problem there, and I don't think this was a legitimate concern, but the federal government is allowing 20-year purchases on timberland now. It used to be a couple years, now it's a 20-year window. They said it was to incentivize production and people to buy the land, we have not had a problem buying the land, having people buy our timber. Our last 2 or 3 timber harvests that I've seen, the bid that won was substantially over market because they need more timber. So there's no legitimate reason for the federal government to have done that from where I sit here in Coos County. But what it does mean is if that sells under these rules, we are cut out of the revenue for 20 years instead of a couple years, which would also be unacceptable. So we see more activity out of the federal government that is throwing us under the bus. It will bolster the Treasury, make up for deficits probably, but it is bad for Coos County. We've got also learned, actually it was on a meeting Friday I learned, that the project that was proposed to move into the Terminal 1 site, so that is the old GP lot in Bunker Hill, that has fallen through. That was a project that I didn't talk a lot about because it was still in action. Because the developers pulled out, I'll talk a little more. It was going to use some of the remaining biomatter from industries we already have here, turn it into a type of fuel that's categorized as a sustainable fuel. It's not a green fuel, but it is a sustainable fuel, they might call it. But near as I know from what it is, I would not think it's a green fuel. So that got cut. The funding that was going to be used to make it happen was cut under this last budget and the administration's policies, which killed somewhere between 80 and 110 living wage jobs for our community. And enough money, at least in tax revenue, to have afforded another police officer. Been dealing with a lot of police departments, so I've got to get myself online between officer, deputy, and trooper. It would have covered a deputy, along with whatever else would have come out of that. I mean, that's just the facility itself. That's not counting the additional income to the community, spending at local businesses, bolstering other local industries. That's one of those other externalities when we see policies move forward, like with Housing First. Well, there's no rental assistance, those people won't have rental assistance, but what does that also mean? That means those landlords aren't going to get paid. Because if these people can't afford rent, they're going to get evicted, but it'll be bad debt because there will be no payment for that debt. So externalities of policy that create problems for us. And from the state side, one of the benefits of these conferences as well is the heads of different state agencies usually have to be there. I don't know that they want to be there, but they do have to be there for at least an hour. So I was able to connect with one of the top guys at the state troopers, one of the director of Oregon Health Authority, and then I also just kind of made my way around the room, learned a little of the Department of Aviation. They're excited about the project at our airport here. Its growing cargo terminal, the expansion of the runway. They're very excited. And I was able to talk to them a little about some laws that changed around drones we use, that they can be helpful in us finding lost people, people trying to hide from us, building inspections, and also identifying where people have illegally tapped into waterways for things like illegal marijuana grows. Or just, stealing water. That's a thing that happens with some people's fields. Those drones are banned for national security reasons, but it has implications for us in that regard. Seems unlikely that anybody would care if we were, trying to find a missing person with one of those drones, but it's a externality when broad actions are taken. That's why we move a little slow sometimes, because we don't want to create those accidental outcomes that harm the community. But talking with OHA director, I've mentioned a lot, CFAA, the mental health contract around people with aid and assist, where the state's trying to make us take the overflow from the state hospital. The feedback I got, because I've requested twice over the last several weeks to get a copy of the state's plan if we don't sign it. We have submitted a copy in case we do. They are not submitting a copy in case we don't. And their assertion is that they were going to contract out all mental health services, and they're going to somehow do that by January 1st. Not going to happen, was never a reality. There is no way in hell they could have ever accomplished that, which the OHA director seemed to acknowledge when I spoke with her at the conference. First time I've been able to meet her in person. Always better when you can meet face-to-face. Feedback was some of her staff may have overspoken or over-committed their position, and that's not the way they're thinking, which maybe not. They might have thought that was the case at the time, but as we stand, 0 of 36 counties have signed this agreement they insist we sign. So they might have also realized they very much overplayed their hand, and to the benefit of that, it is causing there to be unity between rural, urban, and non-urban and frontier counties. I've been adding frontier county to a lot of conversations. Right now, you have urban, non-urban, and rural are the considerations of the state. Urban and non-urban is like Portland Metro, and non-urban is Eugene. So rural, we kind of stand one of 3. If we add frontier to that conversation, now it's 2-2, and things get better. But the plus side there, they are not committed to that position anymore. They don't, I think, have a plan, which is definitely the impression I got speaking with the directors. They have no plan if we don't sign. Which, yeah, of course they don't. So that's probably going to end up somewhere that's more acceptable. It'll definitely end up somewhere that's more acceptable, or it won't. And then speaking with the troopers, I've now got a resource where I'll be able to get the information I'm looking for around what is the allocation formula. How are they determining how many troopers belong in an area? What is the last time they had the number of troopers they've allocated to us? Now, state police have been saving their budget a little bit by replacing funds with those vacant positions, which on the one hand means they're living within their budget, which is nice, but on the other hand, they're doing it at the expense of the services we're supposed to be receiving. And that definitely disincentivizes them from filling those positions. So that broadly is a problem for me, and we'll be digging down that road further. It's a long haul, but if there were simple solutions to the problems we're facing, we wouldn't have these problems. So, committed to the challenge. Discussion around the Council of Governments took place. So, Southern Oregon Council of Governments. Right now, Lane Council of Governments, where a lot of people go for planning projects, even on the coast here. It's a resource we appreciate, we like using when we can. It's cheaper than alternatives, and they're more familiar with what we're facing than some groups. But we're on the South Coast, and the South Coast is very different from Lane County's central area. I mean, they got Florence, but Florence is like 10,000. It's less than 10,000 people. It's getting there. But it's not the South Coast. Even if you're in Florence, you know that really once you get north of Reedsport, it's a different environment than we have down here. So yeah, discussion took place around that with one of the other commissioners out of Curry County. He has actually, I think, been given liaison position in the formation of something like this, so I'll be asking my colleagues in a public meeting to be assigned to work with him. Which one was he? Pat Hollinger, on the idea of a South Coast Council of Governments, or Southern Oregon Council of Governments. We'll figure something out as we go. Good benefit for planning, good collaboration. When we talk about the coordination we're seeing between the county, Bandon, Coos Bay, North Bend around planning, services, flexing staff, a South Coast Council of Governments could expand that even more broadly and create better collaboration between the counties. So it's a thing to work on. It's worth working on. And I got an inquiry about Coos County assisting another county with doing water quality. I'm forgetting. It's a septic inspections, basically. They currently use the state. They would rather contract with Coos County, which is good for us. It's good for them. They get people that are familiar with their area, more so than the state is, and we get money. So everybody's happy. And another connection, another one crossing that urban-rural divide. I had a good conversation with one of the commissioners out of Multnomah. His name's Vince. I'm forgetting his last name, but he's one of the commissioners in Multnomah. And a guy named Vince, you can probably find him. But he was able to connect me with a U.S. attorney that is the vice chair for the high-intensity drug trafficking area designating committee. I've brought this up a few times. That is something that brings a lot of federal resources. It brings additional money and training to our officers. If we had it, we don't. I-5 has it, and Bend, and maybe Klamath County, but South Coast, for all the problems we've had with drugs over the years, massive stuff that's happened, we still do not have that designation from the feds, so we don't get the extra resources. It's been attempted for at least a decade to get that thing for Coos County. And over the course of this almost year now that I've been in office, I've been pushing buttons. We got a big response out in Charleston at one point on a fact finder, so that was good. Now I have the contact information for the U.S. attorney that's the vice chair of the group, thanks to the conversations I was having, and appreciation to the guy from Multnomah. Was actually pretty impressed with him. He took a lot of notes as well around the problems with O&C lands, timber issues. That is not an issue that pertains to Multnomah. They are not a timber county. It is not relevant necessarily to them, but it is relevant to the counties around them. And he understands it's also relevant to the counties out here, which impacts him. So I appreciated his insight around that. And is connecting me with this guy. He didn't have to do it, but it benefits us, and he did it. And that might have actually wrapped everything up while I've been rambling. Like I said, it was a busy week last week. Those conferences can last quite a while in the day. I think Tuesday ran from 8 to 8 at least. And it's a lot of information going around. So I've got piles of notes, piles of handouts that I'll be going through, following up on different things that came up. And of course, while you're there, you're trying to check your phone, respond to expense requests, job posting requests that the county, your departments reach out to you to approve. But at the end of the day, it's worth it to go to these things. As we see more people running for positions, I try to remind folks or encourage folks, whether you're going for the top position at the place you're working or an elected office, when you get to a spot at the top, near the top, it is that is your lifestyle now. It is not your job anymore when you're running a company. That is a good chunk of your life. It's who you are when you walk into a store, you get an elected office. I get texts throughout the day, people asking me questions, one thing or another. Always happy to get those. People sometimes apologize for asking me questions. No reason to apologize. I'm happy to answer the questions. If I don't know the answer, I'm going to reach out to somebody that does, and I'm going to know more at the end of that day, so it's still beneficial to me. But yeah, always feel free to approach, and the others. I know it's okay to approach them as well. And yeah, that's kind of what we live, is we took this position to serve. So with that, that'll be it for the update, and we will see you later. Bye.